Good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's Hurricane Ian coordination call. Today is October the 7th, 2022, and my name is Rob Glenn. I'm the Vice President for Global Resilience at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Over the last week, a number of states, a number of geographies have been impacted by Hurricane Ian, which is a challenging storm in so many different respects. At the Chamber of Foundation, we believe that businesses are a force for good, especially evident during times of disaster where lives and livelihoods are put at risk. We know that no one sector can do it alone, and it's through this partnership with business, government, and nonprofits where impactful operations and impactful solutions really come to the fore. There are a number of different coordination calls throughout Hurricane Ian, and certainly this call is meant to complement those and really highlight some of the accomplishments, what some of the unmet needs are, and what some of the challenges are for the way ahead. So the purpose of this call is to raise awareness around some of these issues, and certainly with the loss of life and the path of Hurricane Ian and the impact that it's wrought to the Carolinas, Georgia, Virginia, and certainly most significantly in the state of Florida. The time for after action reviews for a disaster will come, but now is the time for action. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today, is some of the actions that are being taken by the gathered on the phone today. So we have representatives from the Florida Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, FEMA, the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, Volunteer Florida, Team Rubicon, and then the Sanibel Captiva Chamber of Commerce for a local perspective. So to get us started today, just would like to say that questions will be posted into the chat. We'll get to those and I'll facilitate those at the back end of the call. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Wilson with the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Mark?
All right, well, Rob and team, thanks so much for that. And again, I just, on behalf of all businesses in Florida, I want to just say thank you. Across the nation, we've had such an outpouring of support for what's happening in Florida especially. I just wanted to say thanks there. And Rob, thank you and the National Chamber for reaching out, for putting this national call together. I think it's vital that we all get an updated report. So just quick background, this all started in Florida when Hurricane Andrew happened in the early 90s, a major Category 5. It was a giant wake-up call for Florida. And if you fast forward all the way to 2022, we've had no choice but to have a system of excellence around our Emergency Operations Center from the governor on down. And so that is in action. You're going to hear a little bit about that today. But no matter how well we might be doing on, restoring electricity and trying to find people homes and ice and water and diesel fuel and saving lives, the reality of it is there is a massive need for assistance. We have 250,000 people who have no place to live, and we'll get into a little bit of that. Today, as Rob said, this is not a review of action, and it's certainly not a time for policy conversations. But one thing that's unique to Florida is if you take the world's insured hurricane risk all over the globe, 1/3 of the world's insured hurricane risk is in Florida. And so it's significant. In terms of by the numbers, the 9 counties that were most impacted by this particular hurricane represented about 11% of our state's population and about 10% of our state's GDP. So just want to put that into some perspective. This is significant. You're going to, obviously, Governor DeSantis and our our Department of Economic Opportunity are coordinating everything. In fact, if you've seen the national news, whenever you see Governor DeSantis, standing next to him, you see Secretary Dane from the Department of Economic Opportunity. You're going to hear from Dane later in just a little while, so appreciate him being on the line. I don't want to try to name company names, but I'll just tell you we've been just blown away at the outpouring of corporate support from companies all over Florida who've really stepped in. Our First Lady has a disaster hurricane fund that she's leading. It's already received about $35 million, thanks to some of you on the call and thanks to a lot of Florida employers. That's not anywhere near enough. And so again, to the National Chamber, we appreciate doing this today. You're actually going to hear from Josie, who leads that fund later today as well. So again, several initiatives have been put in place, from emergency loans. Our Florida Small Business Emergency Bridge Loan Program put $50 million on the table. which is exponentially larger than any that we've had before. Our National Guard obviously has been operated. We've rescued over 2,500 people. We have over 1,000 people doing search and rescue. I think you've seen our death count is up around 100. That's obviously going to grow. Also, in terms of power and service restoration, we had 42,000 linemen from over 30 states. It's the largest ever in Florida's history. We've had over 2.5 million people's power has been restored. And now we're down to just over 200,000 that still need their power restored. But as I said earlier, we have about 250,000 who don't have a place to live. You're going to hear later from John Lai, who runs the Sanibel Captiva Island Chamber, to get a bird's eye view of what's actually happening at Ground Zero. So Rob, I'm going to turn it back over to you. But I'm just, again, Florida has an amazing, I think, second to none emergency response mechanism, and that was kicked into gear ahead of the storm. It's performing well, but there's so much assistance that's still needed. We have a long way to go. We're getting all kinds of calls, everything from diesel fuel to water and ice to the calls that break your heart, which is, I can't find my mother or I can't find my son. Is there anything you can do to help us? And so all of that is in play here. And again, I want to thank everybody across the country. This is a time for action, as Rob said before. So thanks so much for your interest in Florida, and we want to partner any way we can. And one more thanks to Rob and our National Chamber partners. So Rob, thanks so much.
Mark, thanks for kicking us off. And Dane, I know you're a man of action and getting things done, so you won't be joining us by video. So I'll turn it over to you as the Secretary of Economic Opportunity in the state of Florida. Dane?
Thank you, Rob. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. And as you said, we're in action. We're on the road as we speak on I-75, moving between disaster recovery centers. And thank you, Mark. Thank you to the U.S. Chamber for hosting this. We certainly appreciate all that the private sector has done to lift us up before, during, and after the storm. And it is going to be a long-term recovery. So appreciate you all giving us your ears as we tell the story, which will, I'm sure, continue to be told. But as Mark said, we have one of the most comprehensive emergency response systems in Florida, and that's just from experience, really, and knowing that we got to get it right. And each time we learn more about what we need to do better, and we certainly have done that, learning especially in Southwest Florida from Charlie and Irma. And this time, what's different is we have a governor who is hyper focused on the mission at hand, being a former military man and just a guy who does not rest until the mission's done. We have seen a response that is unprecedented. I'm in a unique position. I am from Southwest Florida. I used to represent the area in the Florida House of Representatives for 8 years and born and raised there. So being in the Department of Economic Opportunity, our job is to respond to the private sector side, working with our private partners, and the Florida Chamber has been a remarkable partner in helping us do so. And then working with supply chain, box stores, retail, hotels, you name it, making sure we have what we need. But then also being boots on the ground to help the local economy get back on their feet. And so being from the area and then being in this position has been very unique and heartfelt. And I'm just very honored, really, to be able to give back to my community through this effort. So we have deployed dozens of people from the Department of Economic Opportunity into the affected areas, mainly Lee County. Obviously, Charlotte, Collier, Sarasota are also largely affected. We're there as well. And then inland counties. I mean, the storm is widespread. Counties that maybe others never heard of, Hardy, DeSoto, they have flooding coming from Orlando that is 500-year flood type is what we're talking about here. Roads being blown out, you name it. And then St. Augustine, the oldest city in America, has significant flooding on the East Coast as well, as do other areas. So this is a very large response. Being boots on the ground in Fort Myers Beach, haven't been to Sanibel yet, but you'll hear from John Lai. Matt Lachey, where my mother lives, it's like a nuclear bomb went off. And I have no other way to describe it. We were with folks who were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and before we could say it looks like a war zone, because we didn't want to say that, being never been in a war zone, they said it themselves. It looks like a war zone. So it is going to take a long time to recover. The good news is that the community is resilient. They've been through storms before, nothing like this. They haven't seen this kind of storm surge. And so there are a lot of people displaced. And we've already had a housing crisis before that. We've, of course, been addressing it, but Now we have this added on top of it. So we're going to continue to respond. The private sector's been there for us. We've been doing 130 daily calls, but also the governor, as Mark mentioned, has activated the emergency bridge loan, $50 million out of state coffers to help bridge the gap to other long-term loans that SBA might be standing up. We stood up disaster unemployment assistance for short-term opportunities for those who are displaced. And then, of course, we've got Career Source to help us connect with actual jobs. And there are jobs available. So we want to help people who may not have a business to go back to be able to connect. But the private sector stepping in is going to be monumental. Josie's on the call later to talk about the Florida Disaster Fund that the First Lady's already raised over $40 million. And we hope to double that at a minimum in the next few weeks. So if not days. Mark or Rob, I'll stop there. I think you may have some specific questions I can jump into, and anything else I can help cover, happy to do so.
Thanks a lot, Dane. Really appreciate your perspective as you're on the road, given also your history with that area of Florida. FEMA is central to supporting state, local, and private sector and NGO efforts in a disaster. We're joined by Jeff Dorko. Jeff's the deputy for response and recovery for FEMA and responsible for all of FEMA's response and recovery efforts, whether in Puerto Rico, Florida, or elsewhere. So Jeff, over to you to give us an update from a FEMA standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I guess, Mark Wilson's point, not so much an update or to recount, where we've been, but, for me, this is a listening session. I want to hear from you all. You are the pros from Dover who did this before the event, who will do this afterwards, and we need to find out, how we contribute, in the best way in this business. I am listening closely, rest assured, and probably no more so than when John Lai speaks, to find out, what we need to be doing from this moment going forward, formed by the focus on where we've been. Rob made the point that, this is, it's not time for after action reports yet, but I would tell you, shame on us if we're not taking the lessons that we see right in front of us and turning on them immediately, to make corrections to get better, to do what we need to do. I mean, in my business, I tell folks up here, in the federal government, and I'll get to this particular incident in just a second. One of we take the Hippocratic oath before we do anything is first do no harm, to stay out of the way of business, of supply chains and industry who know how to do this, who do this all the time, to make sure that we are not stifling any kind of response or what needs to be done, for the impacted communities and the disaster survivors out there. At the same time, we need to be actively removing barriers, and I'm all ears to figure out where those barriers are. And it's not just this session, it's afterwards. The only bad thing is the thing that you see that you don't let us know that we should be looking at or possibly doing better. And then it's the alignment of our respective capabilities. There's a role for us, there's a role for everybody on this call. And what we want to do is maximize, everybody's ability to get us to where we need to be. I will tell you with this, the standard talking point that I have here is, we were there from day one. I'll tell you, I think we were together more, well in advance of day one. Personally, 10 years in FEMA, I think this is as good a cooperation between, the federal government, us and FEMA and the state as I've ever seen. I think we have been talking early on. We've been aligning resources, and I think this has been as good as it gets. And we've seen supply chains show resilience, maybe in ways they haven't in the past. None of that means anything because all these large supply chains eventually make their way to a barrier island, to a community where small business is the economic engine, is the lifeblood, and we need to keep our focus singularly on that and figure out how we knock down barriers and solve problems. To that end, the administrator has been downrange, and when she was there with the governor, seeing things, reporting back to us, I think we are engaged with senior leadership in ways that we largely always try to do, but I think in terms of effectiveness, in ways I have not necessarily seen before. There are over 2,900 FEMA employees downrange. We have 1,500 folks from other federal agencies, and we are attempting to flow as fast as we can into the area, as many folks as we can, so we can meet the disaster survivors where they are, to bring them that interface where they can figure out what the federal programs are, what the forms of FEMA assistance that they can leverage are, and to get the wheels rolling sooner rather than later to take care of them. There are hundreds of communities and millions of individuals and hundreds of thousands of households that were affected here. And we realized, but it's with every single face out there that we can provide, some sort of useful, actionable solution now rather than tomorrow or the day after. That's how we're going to measure success. I mean, the scope and scale of this is unbelievable. Checked, before I came upstairs, and I think there are already over 300,000 households registered for FEMA assistance with over $105 million out the door. We need to get to where we need to get to, and we're not going to rest our laurels on that. But going faster is going to be better. More disaster survivor assistance teams on the ground, going door to door like they are now. We'll build that capability, going through all the neighborhoods of the hardest affected areas to check on those who are survivors and to make sure that they have the most direct and fastest access to the programs that can help them. We're open disaster recovery centers. And of course, all those virtual ways that people can quickly connect with us, like disasterassistance.gov, using the FEMA app or calling the 1-800-621-FEMA number to register assistance is that first step. Every journey starts with the first step. Once people get into the system, we can manage their cases and get solutions for them as individuals. And like I said, for the communities like the barrier islands that are hit out there, I'm just an old combat engineer, and I'm a guy that's done logistics for FEMA for a while. And it's transportation, it's water, it's power, it's the basic blocking and tackling that's associated with that. And we're still, I know, in a really hard place to make sure we can get to, with the most basic capabilities, the barrier islands and those counties that were most hit. And we are committed to leaning into this and not stopping. I'm seeing people flow out of this headquarters every day to go downrange because they can, putting their pencil down here and going to work. And we're here to hear what your needs are and to try to figure out how we do things better. Thanks. You're muted, Rob.
Thanks. It's only taken 3 years to work Zoom. So when we talk about this great effort, looking at government, private sector, a lot of that centers around volunteers as well. So we're fortunate for April Wood, who leads the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, or NVOAD, to join our call today to give us a perspective from NVOAD standpoint on what the voluntary effort looks like across the impact for Hurricane Ian. April, over to you.
Thanks, Rob, and the entire U.S. Chamber team for the opportunity to share with you today. Our hearts really go out to the impacted communities devastated by this storm. And the VOAD movement represents more than 10 million volunteers across the country. And we know, based off coordination calls over the last week, that thousands of volunteers are responding to Hurricane Ian in Florida, and more than 170 organizations that have raised their hands and said they are also providing services and programs responding to Ian. Many of our members are providing sheltering and hot meals, emotional, physical, spiritual care support at this point in time. Muckouts, tarping is ongoing, particularly with the Blue Roof program that has now been implemented. And we really, so many other programs and services are available through those nonprofits. But we know we have to do all of this together, working and partnering with our government partners, as well as our private sector partners. And the Florida VOAD team has done a tremendous job leading the way with Alan and Christie's efforts and coordinating through the state EOC and with Volunteer Florida, and really looking for that complex recovery to be a coordinated effort. I had the opportunity, I just came from a meeting at FEMA this morning, the Recovery Support Function Leadership Group, and convened by Administrator Criswell and Dr. Melissa Forbes, of all the assistant secretaries across the federal interagency. And it was just so encouraging to see the commitment. They were there to have a conversation around how they can expedite recovery, and the commitment that exists across our federal interagency, our state emergency management partners, and the voluntary sector and private sector is unlike anything, in the last 20 years that I've seen in my career. And so I am kudos to all of you for your efforts, your coordination level that's taking place, and just thrilled to see what's happening. We know there's so much need right now across the state of Florida and other areas that have been impacted by recent disasters. And so thank you for everything that you're doing. If you would like to support some of our vetted National VOAD member organizations, you can visit nvoad.org. That's nvoad.org. We do have a Hurricane Ian relief page set up that will link you back to Volunteer Florida to sign up to volunteer, as well as connecting with the Florida VOAD team and other resources. And just a huge thank you again to the FEMA folks and Florida State EOC folks for their leadership and continued partnership And thank you to our private sector partners for supporting us in everything we do. We are concerned about cost and donor fatigue for this particular response, and we know that it is a significant complex recovery ahead of us. So thank you in advance for your support. It's appreciated.
Thanks a lot, April. Really appreciate that insight. And so also someone else on the move is Josie, who leads Volunteer Florida. She's also joining by phone today as well, won't be on camera. Josie, I'll turn it over to you to give us your view of the volunteer effort in Florida and also some of the progress of your work over the last week. And we're not hearing Josie, so we might have audio difficulties. So we'll keep the light on for her. One of the organizations that does use volunteers, particularly veterans like myself, and the veteran who leads the operations for Team Rubicon is Jeff Byard. Jeff also was in emergency management in Alabama, as well as FEMA. So Jeff, it's great to see you, and I'll turn it over to you to give us your view of where we can take some action.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. And, appreciate the chamber for the opportunity to speak to this team. How Team Rubicon integrates, we work hard on the blue skies. The most important and effective tool we can have is relationships and partnerships. A prime example, we were in Director Guthrie, has a spot for us in their state emergency operations center. So we were in there early through relationships in Hillsborough, Charlotte, Lee County, Polk County. We have Gray Shirts, which is represented here in the local EOCs. One of the first actions that we did as a team is move some of our specialized teams downrange that could clear routes. It's a small drop in a big bucket, but anything helps. And we were able to move over 6,000 cubic yards of debris and clear 131 obstructions within the first 48 hours post landfall. So, those relationships and those partnerships, not just at the local level, at the state level, and really any level, are very, very key. So what are we doing now? That's the big question. We currently have 206 Gray Shirts on the ground. We're projected to have 279 by tomorrow. This will be our biggest mobilization in the team's history. And it's not for records, it's for need. We plan on, we already got 3 large forward operating bases, and one in Polk, one in Charlotte, one in Lee County. We really want to plus up down in the Fort Myers area. We know there's a tremendous amount of need there. We're in the stages of opening up in DeSoto, Volusia, and some of the counties in between there. Our challenge is billeting our Gray Shirts, but we're working through that. It's important to know that in this business, you can be mistake-free, you can be cost-effective, you can be timely, but you got to pick one. You can't be all three, and we're going to go with timely every time. It's really good to see April on here. I think it's important for all of us to put in perspective. A disaster survivor may need 100 things. Team Rubicon may provide 5 of those. And, so it's important that we bring partners with us. It's important that we partner with others with that we can provide our specialty to. And our job is to expedited home repair, debris removal, really helping folks get back into a safe sanitary home if possible, and just being a beacon of hope. Presence is a mission in these types of disasters and all disasters. So it's really just being having that presence, making sure that our Gray Shirts are meeting the needs and meeting the disaster survivors where they are. So, we're going to be doing tarping. We're going to be doing expedited home repair. We're going to be doing muck outs. We're going to be doing debris removal. And we set a very audacious goal for the team. We're driving towards 500 Gray Shirts on the ground daily for the next 8 to 12 weeks. So it's definitely a marathon for Team Rubicon. We value the partnerships and want to grow those partnerships. So thank you to everybody on the call. Thank you to those that will be downrange. Thank you to those that are downrange now. And that's what I got, Rob. It's good to see some of my friends and colleagues that are on the panel, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks a lot, sir. I really appreciate it. And it does not seem like we have Josie yet, but we'll keep trying to get her on from Volunteer Florida. John Lai, we talk about all disasters being local emergency management and just the way that the whole community is supposed to support those that are in greatest need. I think John probably best represents that local need of businesses, business owners, and a community really hit hard by Hurricane Ian. So John, I'd like to get your perspective now on what does this local impact look like, and what's the road ahead look like too?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rob and Mark, for putting this call together, and for everyone on the call. I really appreciate all that you've done to help us get this far. It's hard to believe that 9 days ago, I think it's 9 days ago, maybe it's 10 now, but our world was completely rocked. And just a little bit about who we are as a community. Southwest Florida depends on its tourism for about 25% of its jobs. And so obviously that lies heavily along the coast. And so my particular chamber represents Sanibel and Captiva Islands. And in the name, you'll hear the word islands, and that's exactly what we are. We are two barrier islands that sit parallel to the coastline of Southwest Florida. And then the Fort Myers Beach, which is Jackie Lisak's chamber, it sits just off the coast of South Fort Myers. So the three of us, the three barrier islands, took probably the greatest hit. The other being Matlacha and Pine Island, and so you can see that devastation from the coastline in, and 90% of our tourism jobs, I would say, are located within those islands. So we do have a long road ahead of us, and one of the questions I keep getting is how's your community doing? How are they holding up? And as you would expect, we've got 250,000 people, I think Mark said, that are now homeless in Southwest Florida in this particular region, and a lot of them are my friends. They're our members, and they were the people who were either doing the work in those industries, or they were the business owners. A lot of 80% of our membership actually were owner operated. So small business being the lifeblood of our economic engine in America, they represented that very, very well. And I know that Jackie echoes that as well. We're resolved to rebuild, and that resolve, if you've been in Southwest Florida for over any length of time, you've seen disasters come and go. We're no strangers to hurricanes. This is unlike anything that we've ever seen. And I think when Dane, Secretary Eagles, mentioned the fact that it looks like a war zone, I actually had to move inside just now because I was sitting outside, but the Chinooks flying over, the military helicopters were so loud that I didn't think that you'd be able to hear me on this call. So I'm sitting in a closet right now, and it's hot. So we are dealing with something that is unprecedented. We are dealing with something that our businesses don't know, have not seen before, and they are just anxious to take the first step. So what do we need? What are the needs of our small businesses? I think that when you look at from the coastline in, there are some specific needs that the short term are very, very important to us, and those are access to our businesses, manpower, housing, and obviously funding. Secretary Eagle and DEO was very quick to activate the bridge loan, the emergency bridge loan, and I want to thank him for that. But the access, the manpower, and the housing are also key components to getting back in. Sanibel and Captiva Islands were only accessible through a bridge that is now destroyed. And Governor DeSantis and DOT have announced that initially we thought it was going to be a year and a half before we can get that bridge rebuilt. It is a 3-mile bridge, so it's no small undertaking. And we have a promise from the state that it will be finished by the end of this month. That's impressive, and it is the absolute morale boost that our community needs. One of the things I didn't mention that we absolutely need is encouragement from our business community. A lot of our businesses, like I said, are small business owners. They've not seen anything like this before, and they need the encouragement to even if it's just words of affirmation going, we'll help you get there. It means a lot. They don't know what first step to take is. And so anything that you can offer them will help them make that first step. Longer term, we're going to need help in local and state from local and state governments to assist in rebuilding with permitting and licenses and things like that. We're also going to need health, both human and physical resources. We talked about a lot about the volunteers. We will need skilled workers down here. We will need to make sure that we can get things like cement, plywood, and all of the resources that have been hard to get earlier this year prior to the hurricane. So we know that this is a long road. We would like to shorten that road as much as we possibly can. And I will tell you that every one of my chamber colleagues has said to me this week that this is the one storm that we have experienced that has impacted everyone we know, whether it be personally or professionally. Either their homes are damaged, their businesses are damaged, or both are damaged. Or they're missing or trying to find relatives or friends. And so with all of that in mind, the thing that we're finding ourselves doing as chamber leaders is working from 7 in the morning until midnight to help connect, convene, and give hope to our business community and make sure that they are in touch with the resources that they need to be in touch with, not to mention helping our local government navigate some of the things that they need to navigate. Funding is going to be an issue for our local chambers. And I'll tell you that both the Greater Fort Myers Beach Chamber and the Fort Myers Chamber, the Greater Fort Myers Chamber and the Fort Myers Beach Chamber join me in not having a building right now. So all 3 of those buildings were destroyed in the storm. And not all of us had flood insurance. And so, the need for that is weighing on us very heavily. I can tell you that for myself, and I'm sure for the others as well, quarters 4 and quarters 1 were where we saw 50% of our funding for the year as a chamber. And so that's a concern for us. We want to continue to help our communities the way that we know they need the help. We want to continue to help our friends and our family and our local business owners. We also want to make sure that that's something we don't need to worry about. Rob, I see you back. I'll let you go ahead and ask some questions.
John, I just want to let you know that Josie is able to dial in. So I wanted to get back to Josie from Volunteer Florida and also allow some, we have I think about 11 or 12 questions in the chat too. We'll get back to your perspective too. Josie, I'll turn it over to you from Volunteer Florida. Floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I myself am on the road and am one of our volunteer centers here in Nokomis, and I want to thank you all for having me on the call. And I also want to reiterate what everyone has said. This has been an unbelievable event, an unbelievable storm, and an unbelievable show of leadership from everyone, from Governor DeSantis to the First Lady, to, of course, Secretary Eagle, and to all our partners in the Emergency Operations Center. I have the great privilege of representing Volunteer Florida, and today is my 30th day in the job, and there's nothing like learning while you're acting in one of the biggest disasters there has ever been in the United States history. But I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of things. We at Volunteer Florida do do many great things. Not only do we do the emergency management piece with Christy Rojas and our team and the Emergency Operations Center, but we work alongside with all our VOAD partners, which is very important and very critical for purposes of response and, of course, recovery in these disasters. We also are the premier lead agency in Florida for volunteerism, and we do that with over 500 partners that we partner with, and we use that through the mechanism through Volunteer Connect. And so Volunteer Connect, if you go to www.volunteerflorida.org, there is a drop down for Volunteer Connect, which will allow organizations, all organizations actually, to post volunteer opportunities. And I can tell you that we have been working with all organizations around, and we have daily calls, obviously, not only with our VOAD partners, but with other partners. But more importantly, what has brought us here today, and what I see just sitting here and driving to different areas, Obviously, we want people to volunteer and we want them to do that because there is so much of a need. So I urge everyone, a moment of your time to go, and I'm at a volunteer center right now, to look and talk to volunteers, is to take that time if you are able to do that, and to go to www.florida Volunteer Connect. And it is a drop-down menu for different areas. You can register as an organization, you can register as an individual, and if at any time you need any assistance with that, I will leave you my personal email at the end of my comments. But also, more importantly, what brings us here is obviously the Florida Disaster Fund. And I want to thank, first and foremost, obviously, the First Lady and the Governor, but specifically the First Lady, for bringing such attention to this fund. And it is Florida's official private fund established to assist Florida communities as they respond to and recover during times of emergency and disaster. Now, since about 7 days, and I will say we raised a record amount of money, and I'm not going to call out corporate folks, but we have over 70 corporate partners that have given, and that is an amazing, and every day. And not only that, but we have had about 55,000 people enter credit card donations, obviously, to contribute to the disaster fund. And the funds are obviously for purposes not only for response, but also for recovery. And I think many of us on this phone have talked about what it will take for recovery in our communities. Excuse me. I'm talking fast. So since Hurricane Ian hit, our volunteers, especially Team Rubicon is on the phone, has been absolutely wonderful in our response efforts throughout the affected areas. We have sent already now out over $1 million in response monies and from the volunteer fund to entities such as Save the Children, the Salvation Army, Team Rubicon, Catholic Charities, Operation Barbecue Relief, the United Way of Collier County, Midwest Food Bank. And these organizations have really been on the ground, you know, sharing food, feeding, tools, all the necessary items, along with all, obviously, and they are part of our, not only our organizations that we work with. So it's very, very important. Right now, we have raised about 40 million, and we were just at an event with the First Lady, and someone asked the question, how much do you need? She goes, as much as you want. We want to hit 80 million because, as you all know, the amount of money that will be needed for purposes of recovery will be vast. So I just want to say, if you all are interested or know someone who wants to either volunteer or contribute to the disaster fund, obviously it's at www.disasterfund.org, or you can text disaster at 20222. And it is obviously we are going to be looking at sending out additional funds, and we are making sure that we are doing that in a very careful way in order to meet the needs that are out there, not only in response, but also in recovery, because we are still obviously paying out from our grants from Hurricane Michael and Irma. So with that, I just want to thank everybody on the phone, all the partners on the phone, and echo just a great effort on behalf of the First Lady and the Governor and all state agencies in their respective roles in how we respond to this disaster. And thank you for your time. And thank you. I'm on. I'm so happy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for Josie. Really appreciate your leadership and also just how you've confronted your new job with vigor. I want to share another number. You know, we keep track the best as we can at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, corporate goodwill, with that could be in-kind, could be capabilities and capacities delivered in a disaster, could also be financial contributions. Right now, we're tracking more than 150 companies have provided $75 million towards the effort in Hurricane Ian. So, you know, compared with, you know, so many different efforts, this is where we're talking about taking action. We are now at a point where I think we can have a little bit of dialogue with all of those that have been gathered. There are a number of different questions that have already been posted in the Q&A. Please keep doing that. We'll try to answer or go through all of the questions as well. And then also some of the questions I'm seeing on here relate to some of the resources that have been mentioned, as well as some points of contact we're going to, at the end of the day, probably, or even maybe over the weekend, we'll be sending out both a recording of this call to those that were registered, as well as some additional resources. So just to make it a little bit easier. So I will start to go through some of the questions, and I will start with one, and it's related to Team Rubicon and maybe some voluntary organizations in general. The question is, does Team Rubicon charge for providing help to a community? Jeff, April, anything you want to add to that question?
Yeah, Rob, thank you for that question. And let me just say this, absolutely not. None of our services are charged to anybody. We do what we do out of volunteerism and out of the philanthropy and the good nature of individuals and corporations. So we, and that is, I have heard that downrange, and I appreciate you bringing that up, but no, we do not charge any homeowners for any services that we provide. Thank you.
Sure. April?
And that extends across the voluntary organizations active in disaster. These organizations are out there with thousands of volunteers helping in communities. I know a lot of folks are registering through the crisis cleanup call center line to be able to provide that support. And all of it is provided for free and with no expectation of anything in return. We're just there to help alleviate the suffering.
Thanks both. Another question, and maybe this is for John, and it's, how can the islands recover in time for the next tourist season? That you talked about that road both literally and figuratively, John, a couple of minutes ago, but I know that that's weighing on your mind for sure.
Yes, Rob, I'll be honest. I think that the next tourist season will be a rebuilding process for us still. We are looking at the entire island at minimum, have buildings with 4 feet of storm surge in them, and at worst 10 to 12 feet of storm surge. So this is not a 2023 season goal for us. It's 2024. Yeah, I mean, that's the short answer.
Okay.
That bridge, though, Rob, will just help us expedite the process of rebuilding. Without that bridge, we're relying on barges and ferries, and that is not ideal.
So when you're talking about resources a minute ago, and there are a couple of questions related to rebuilding homes and rebuilding buildings, what is the best way? Maybe this is Mark and Dane too. What's the best way for volunteers and or those that have capability, like a contractor? What's the best way for them to connect more directly in Florida to do some good?
I mean, I'm a chamber guy. I'm going to tell you to join the local chamber. I'm also going to, but I will tell you that is honestly, when you look at the chamber leaders that are in this community, we can get you in front of the right people to make sure that we use your resources the absolute best of our ability, and make sure that we connect them with whether they be city or county leaders or small business owners, or wherever we need to put them, we will. But yeah, that makes the most sense to me, for sure.
And this is Dane. From the state perspective, obviously, if there's contractors that have a service and they think they've got labor, a lot of the state contracts, they have these pre-executed, but then those subcontracts, they need subcontractors, they need labor. So I would encourage them to contact the state or the local city or counties. And then people that want to volunteer, I think Josie was on Volunteer Florida. We're sending people there. There's a lot to do. And then, of course, there's our local nonprofits and churches that are boots on the ground, just helping fill in gaps. And that's been the most encouraging thing I've seen yet, is just people that are sitting in their homes without power, don't want to be sitting in their homes. They want to be out helping, and they're certainly doing that.
April?
Yeah, I was just going to add, many of our voluntary organizations active in disaster are always looking for skilled workers, particularly our rebuild partners. And so having the opportunity to sign up with a vetted organization at invoad.org, we've got a list of more than 70 organizations there that are members of the National VOAD team and are vetted and willing to help facilitate skilled volunteers, providing resources in the state of Florida. And then, of course, Volunteer Florida, if you're there local and you want to help and support, volunteerflorida.org is the best way to sign up to volunteer.
Thanks. We did have another question. Go ahead.
No,
Josie.
this is Josie at Volunteer Florida. We get these calls, we get emails and calls as to where we can, people who are going to volunteer. And we try to match them not only with an organization that can utilize them if through Volunteer Connect, right? And if it's something like as we've said, contractors or others, then we contact our other partners that we work very closely with in the Emergency Operations Center, saying these people would like to volunteer in these areas. How can we get them to what they need? And so we're getting those calls all the time, and we're constantly vetting and making sure they're getting to the right places. As I say, we're not managing the because of the size of what we do at Volunteer Florida. But trust me, whenever a call comes in and says, I want to volunteer, I want to do this, I make sure that my volunteer coordinator, Ms. Woodrich, is on it, talking to my ESF director, Christy Rojas, because we want to make sure to be able to get those volunteers on the ground as soon as possible.
Thanks, Josie. One of the other questions that we had, actually, there are a couple of questions related to the issue of those that are displaced from their homes because their homes are just not able to be lived in anymore. I think, Mark, you mentioned at the top that there were estimated 250,000 displaced, and then there's another question related to what can be done to solve the housing challenge for those that have been displaced. Any reaction from your standpoint, Mark, or anyone on the panel?
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll go first and let somebody else sort of clean up there. I think, the first numbers we heard were in the 350,000 range in terms of people that were displaced. And that number's come down to about 250. Just to be clear, there's no one official place. There's not like somebody standing out there counting. The number moves around, but the numbers being reported in the national media right now are about 250,000 people. In terms of what's happening on the ground, our restaurant and lodging association, our members in the hotel industry, there's a big move afoot to figure out, how can we convert some of that to short-term residences. And there's obviously we've seen FEMA trailers in the past, but, if it turns out that we actually have a couple 100,000 people that have to be relocated for a year, they're going to need to be close by. They're going to need to work. That's unprecedented, right? So there's teams of people trying to figure that out. If there's anybody on the call right now that has a solution for that, I think we're all ears for it. Obviously, the power companies have done an amazing job getting the power turned back on. I think 93% are back online now. So people who, may have been displaced because of that are back in. But to John Lai's point, we have businesses that were here one day and the building's not there the next. We have businesses who had 50 employees and their homes are just not there. So this is going to be a big deal for a while. And I think when all's said and done, we can get debris out of the way. We can get the power grid back on. We had over 50 breaches in the water lines in one county alone. We can get all that fixed, but people need a place to live and a place to work. And those numbers are big and they're going to stay big for a while.
Thanks, Mark. Jeff from FEMA, I don't know if you want to add anything to that since FEMA was mentioned in Mark's description related to some of the short-term and long-term challenges for sheltering and housing. Jeff, do you have a perspective to share, or anyone else?
I don't know that I have a perspective so much as, this is difficult. The scope and scale of this make it all the more difficult. I mean, there are things like, TSA, that allows for temporary sheltering, but time in a hotel is certainly not an answer to this. And we are going to partner with the state. I know the state is working really, really hard on the approach to this, and we'll be there to certainly do our part in all this, given that there's a broad range of authorities across the federal government where we can help. And so, coming up with a well thought out integrated solution quickly is where we want to be. But while every disaster is different, this one is particularly tough because of the scope and scale. I don't know that there are any easy answers to it, given the numbers that were just quoted.
Yep, yeah, agreed. Dane, I see that you're off mute.
Yeah. I figured I'd add in there, and certainly what was just said from FEMA is accurate. There's no real silver bullet, but we are trying to put our heads together and see what is possible. We've been working on the private side with Airbnb and Expedia, which has been listing all the hotels that are available. But as said, that's not really a long-term solution. Even in the short term, supply has been a challenge. We've had such a mass area that's been affected, and then so many people coming into the community, first responders, and people like me, state agencies, that the supply for hotels and Airbnb has been gobbled up. One thing that we saw after Hurricane Charlie in Punta Gorda, Charlotte County, which is again affected, was a FEMA village. And what I think what we'll say, even talking with FEMA and our partners, our regional administrator, who I've been spending a lot of time with, is that is not ideal. Obviously, it may need to be one of many solutions, but it isn't ideal. So as much as we can keep people closer to home, the better. And I know Charlotte County's made the request, if we're going to be doing FEMA trailers, can we put it right on their own property so they can at least be in their property by their home, helping it get fixed up, and they can at least have some form of normalcy. I don't know that every city or county is going to want that, but that is a idea that's being thrown around.
Thanks for that. And it's really, every disaster is hard. This is probably one of the hardest ones I've ever seen, and that goes without saying. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and just want to be respectful of everyone's time. Only about 5 minutes left. And Dane, since you were just talking, and maybe there's someone else that's doing this, but any number of breakdown of the businesses that are at risk of not coming back related to Hurricane Ian. Certainly that's going to be a concern from an economic and lives and livelihood standpoint.
As far as those that aren't going to come back, we don't have a firm number. I can talk general numbers. I mean, even being in downtown what we call Times Square, Fort Myers Beach, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of businesses that no longer exist. And John will probably say the same for Sanibel. So that's a reality. We don't have those numbers in front of us. We have been asking businesses to self-report through the Business Damage Assessment Survey on floridadisaster.biz, floridadisaster.biz. We have had over 2,000 businesses, and this is across Florida. It's actually underrepresented in Southwest Florida because those businesses don't necessarily have access to internet, and it's the last thing on their mind right now, possibly. And they've self-reported, those 2,000 businesses have self-reported over 300 million in damage. And again, I'm talking Orlando, Hillsborough, number of counties, and Lee and Charlotte are underrepresented there. So that number is obviously much larger. And then we did stand up the emergency bridge loan. We've had over 1,000 businesses apply for that. It's capped at 50,000. That is designed to be a short-term, immediate money in your pocket while you look for more long-term funding, maybe from SBA. So even if that 50,000 cap at $50 million, if we have 1,000 businesses at the
Dane,
that's already expended. That just goes to show you the.
So hopefully, I know Dane's on the road, and we're almost at time. So before we do that, I just like to ask, John from Sanibel, Captiva. John, what's the one thing that we need to remember as we're closing down this call, knowing that Ian's gone, but the effects are going to be far-reaching for some time? What's the one thing that we need to have on our minds?
I'll tell you that we've seen this particular disaster, as many do, have brought out the best in people in so many different ways. As also we've seen the not so great side of them as well. And we need to remember, I'll tell you that this is the storm that has impacted everyone in our community, whether it be personally, professionally, or both. And so, I would just, the first thing I tell you is as you come down and you try to help us, and you do the things that you're doing, and we get back online, just remember to give people the benefit of the doubt. They're not, they may be a little gruff, they may be a little upset, but it's not you. It's something that they've got going on. The other thing that I'll tell you from a practical standpoint is just that we need, as this whole call has been focused on, help maneuvering around the red tape that is usually accompanied in rebuilding. And this is not a renovation. This is an absolute from the ground up rebuilding process in so many of our communities. And so wherever we can find assistance in that, we desperately need it.
Thanks a lot, John, and thanks everyone for joining that was on the panel, as well as those that have gathered. As we're wrapping up this call, know that this is probably not the only call that we are going to do from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation related to Hurricane Ian. Certainly hurricane season is also not over, and neither is the opportunity to take action for those that have been impacted by Ian. So there have been a number of resources that were mentioned on this call, ways to help, ways to give, ways to contribute, but also to be part of the solution. So you'll see a list, at the end of the day to come out via email. Chamber Foundation also has our corporate aid tracker. So if you are on the call and you're doing something in Florida and you want to raise awareness around that, we'd be happy to get that feedback at resilience at uschamber.com. And then also just want to say thanks to everyone, but also for those that are in Florida, you're not alone. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to convene this call today, was to start the action, the road to recovery, knowing it's going to take the whole community, the whole nation potentially to help out John and many others at the local level. With that, thanks for joining today, and we will hope that you are safe wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much.